Abstaining from harmful substances, some of them the things we're talking about that are in most people's homes, like coffee. Now, how many people drink coffee today? Yeah, lots of people, probably a lot of people here. But the consumption of coffee is actually increasing around the world, particularly in America, and it does a lot of damage to the body. Caffeine is a poison. It stimulates the adrenal glands. It gives you an up, but then it drops you down again later. So when it drops you down, you need to get another cup of coffee. It's extremely addictive. And at Living Valley Springs, we actually have a lot of people come there to give up coffee because they just can't give it up. And we're talking about people that might be having, say, 8 or 9 cups a day, and the withdrawals that they go through are often worse than what we've seen people coming off heroin. You know, I've seen people get the DTs and just vomit and everything just because their body's craving for coffee because they haven't had any for 2 or 3 days. They get severe headaches. Yeah, so it's not a good thing to have. And there's plenty of good beverages out there. If you're going to drink something, it's a lot better to drink something that's going to be healthful rather than something that's going to actually reduce your lifespan. And coffee will reduce your lifespan. Not only the caffeine that's in it, but the chemicals that are in the processing of the beans. And it's sure, it makes you feel good, but there's plenty of things out there that'll do the same without the toxic effect, like peppermint tea, for example. There's lots of herbs out there like peppermint tea. There's chamomile, which will relax you, and then there's fennel tea, and there's many other herbal teas. We're actually looking at bringing out a whole range of herbal teas for different ailments. We should have those out by the end of the year. And we've got a whole lot of different names, but the main one we're going to call longevity tea, which is designed to give you a bit of a kick and actually promote longevity and wellness. Tea is another problem. The normal tea, green tea is okay because there's no caffeine in it, and green tea is a very good antioxidant and it aids digestion, but normal tea doesn't do those things. Normal tea is still quite high in caffeine and it's high in tannin. Now tannin has a bad effect on the kidneys and the nervous system. So we want to get away from these drugs that people seem to have every day. I've travelled a bit lately and I'm finding that today a lot more places are providing herbal teas and coffee substitutes because I think people are starting to become aware of the diseases you can get from these things. So I just recommend that you all wean yourself off these drug beverages and get onto beverages that actually will be healthful to you and learn to like them. You might ask me about things like Echo and Nature's Cuppa, and they're okay. They don't do you any harm, but you're better off having herbal teas because they actually do you good. Now, eating between meals is another big problem because our stomachs take about 4 hours to process the average meal. And if we keep interrupting our stomach, well then our stomachs are going to wear out. And a lot of people today have 7 or 8 meals. You know, they'll start with breakfast, they have morning tea, then a snack, then lunch, then afternoon tea, then a snack, and then, you know, like what I used to do when I was young. But the trouble is it does wear out the stomach, and so we get to about 40 and our stomachs don't produce enough hydrochloric acid anymore. And we start to get digestive problems. We get flatulence and burping and things like that for the rest of our lives. And we don't get the same assimilation of nutrients from our food because we've worn the stomach out in the earlier years by overeating or by eating too often. And you find that if you go back into like history, you'll find that one case was when Moses brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, and the record actually tells us that God told him to put them on a 2-meal-a-day program in preparation for the Promised Land. Now, they only had 2 meals a day. You find that Alexander the Great, when he took his soldiers to war, he kept them on 2 good meals a day and maybe a small one in the evening. But today, a lot of people have a lot more than that. I think a lot of people still need 3 meals today because the digestive systems are fairly poor, and they may not just be getting enough nutrient out of 2 meals. But some people do very well on 2 meals. And I know my wife is a 2-mealer, has been for years, and she functions a lot better on 2 than she does on 3. So you've got to really work out what sort of person you are. But if you want to lose weight, you need to have good breakfast, good lunch, and only a very small meal in the evening. Don't go to bed on a big meal because you're going to end up just putting it into fat. Okay, well that's a bit on abstemiousness. We'll probably cover that a lot more in different ways as we go through the program. Rest is another really important one because today TV and entertainment often keeps people up very late, and it's the hours before midnight are worth twice the value of the hours after midnight. And the hours before midnight we make a lot more melatonin. Melatonin is the hormone that has now been proven to be very effective against the development of cancer. Right, so people who go to bed late all the time, year in, year out, have got a much higher chance of getting cancer. People who go to bed early, especially the pre-midnight hours, have got a much less chance of getting cancer. And it's important that your room is dark because melatonin is produced in darkness. It's not produced in light. So you don't want to have any light coming into your room, and you don't want a radio clock next to your bed, like a digital clock, because if you do, the electromagnetic field coming out of that clock gets picked up by the brain as white light, and so it reduces your production of melatonin. Right, so we need to get pre-midnight sleep, and we need 7 to 8 hours sleep per night is the ideal. We don't need more than 8, we don't need less than 7 usually, but at times of stress, people can often get away with 5 or 6 hours for a period of time, but we need to get back to our 7 to 8 hours. They've found in studies that people who get less than 7 or more than 8 don't live as long as the people who get the 7 to 8 range. So that's your perfect range. If you're needing more than 8 hours sleep a night, there's something wrong. Some of the areas to look at would be the B12 level. If your B12 level is low, you'll need a lot more sleep. Iron. Now it's interesting, when we get into nutrition, you'll find that oftentimes the reason why people have a low iron level can be because they're not eating enough protein. Because iron can be a free radical in the body, and it needs protein to protect the body. Basically, when we have iron in the body forms a shell called ferritin, and that encases the iron molecule. And now if we've got low protein, then our body will get rid of our iron as quick as it can. It'll pee it out. Right, so we'll end up with an iron deficiency. If we go and take iron, that can be a problem, because if we're taking iron when our protein status is very low, then we can actually get free radical damage from excessive iron. Right, so you don't want to just go and take iron because your iron is low. You've got to work out why is the iron low and check the protein status. We'll go into that a lot more when we get into nutrition. Now, exercise, how much do we need? Well, really exercise is so important because we find that people who are eating all the right foods and doing no exercise don't do as well as the ones who eat all the wrong foods and exercise. I mean, we see athletes who just eat junk, they're footballers and so on, and they do quite well. Exercise is vitally important, and we really need to keep the bodies moving or they rust up. So we need to be doing at least 40 minutes a day of good movement, continual movement. That means a walk, a swim, or some gardening, something like that. And we need to try and get a variety of exercises so that we're doing aerobic and anaerobic. Now, that means that we should be doing some push-ups or pull-ups or chin-ups or sit-ups, those sort of exercises as well as our walking. You see, and if we can make that part of our life, we will live a lot longer and we will enjoy life a lot better. We'll have clearer head, we'll have better circulation, we will feel a lot better, just for the sake of adding a 40-minute exercise regime to our day. But you know, I know a lot of people, they just go week after week after week and they just can't fit it in. We have to fit it in. Proper diet, well, I won't go into that too much at this point because we're going to cover that on one of the nights. But at Living Valley Springs, we promote a diet that's rich in fruits and vegetables, plenty of good raw foods as well. We promote the use of organic grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and we also promote the use of organic eggs and some organic dairy products. We used to be a bit more toward the vegan diet, like back about 10 years ago, but we found that it created too many problems with too many people's health. So we started looking into the chemistry and the nutrient levels. We started doing blood chemistry studies and monitoring people's health. And we found that there was major problems with the vegan diet. We'll go into that a lot more when we talk about nutrition. But I think that's on Thursday night, so you don't want to miss that one. That's a really important night to come along. But we found that the use of organic eggs, and there's plenty of those available in this area, and some of the organic dairy products like yogurt, you can get organic feta and organic cream. What else? Some of the soft cheeses like brie and camembert, they're all very good. You find that the hard cheeses are not. Hard cheeses are a totally different thing. Hard cheeses will clog up the blood and they will clog up the arteries and the colon, whereas the soft cheeses are totally different. And we'll cover the difference on Thursday night. We tend to promote a vegetarian diet, but we recommend people don't jump into it overnight. It's something they need to wean themselves into. The reason for that is not because meat in itself is that bad, because people have been eating it for thousands of years and they didn't have the diseases we have today. The problem with meat today is the farming techniques and the processing methods that are being used with meat, with animals. It's creating disease in the animals, and the disease in the animals is on the increase. We're hearing about mad cow and foot and mouth and so on. So we recommend to our guests that when they go home they start looking at vegetarianism as an alternative, because in the long term we're going to see a lot more animal diseases in this country and we need to be ready. And if we don't know how to replace the proteins and the fats and so on, we're going to get ourselves into trouble. It happened in England. 40% of England went vegetarian when mad cow disease hit there, and a lot of them didn't know how to do it. And so within a year we've got a lot of people with very depleted blood chemistries in England because they didn't know how to do it. So we say if you're a meat eater, don't jump out of it, but just look at replacing one meal here or one meal there with a good vegetarian meal. And we don't necessarily promote the use of canned and packaged protein substitutes. It's better to use whole foods like legumes and nuts and seeds and whole grains and so on, rather than using processed foods. So we'll cover that a lot more with you, and I recommend if you know people that are interested in the food, bring them along on Thursday night. The use of water, really important. We need at least 8 glasses of water per day. And when you get out of bed in the morning, the greatest need of the body is water. You've been lying in bed for 7 or 8 hours. You may not have drunk water for another 2 hours before you went to bed, so your body is dehydrating. The greatest need of the body when you wake up is 3 glasses of water. And it's good to put a little bit of lemon juice in it and rehydrate the body straight away. And then throughout the day, spread out your water. Try and drink 2 litres throughout the day, not with your meals, because you will dilute the stomach acids. We should never drink water with our meals because it's going to actually mess up our digestion. But drink water between meals. From about an hour and a half to 2 hours after a meal, up till about 20 minutes before the next meal is the right time to drink your water. And we shouldn't be eating anything between meals except water. Maybe a herbal tea's okay, but you don't want any food, and you don't want, even the substitute coffees are no good because the body takes them in as a food, because they're going to interrupt the process of digestion. Right? So water is important. The last law of health is trust in divine power, and we're going to be talking about this on Wednesday night. And we're looking at the areas of the emotional areas that we can hand over to God. The things like guilt and anxiety and distrust and remorse and bitterness. Now, we have so many people that come to Living Valley Springs with diseases that are really caused through bitterness. And I mentioned that before. And if we've got bitterness there, and when I'm talking about bitterness, someone's wounded you in the past, you've never dealt with it properly, you've got enemies out there, there's people you don't like, those sort of things that eat away at the health. We need to deal with them. And we call it trust in divine power because that's what it was called in the book. But really, you'll find that a lot of these problems you can't deal with unless you involve God in your life. And we will bring that into it a little bit on the Wednesday night. Okay, now that was where we were supposed to have got to before. So we'll move on. Now part 2 tonight, I call it the recovery model because it's the model that we've developed at Living Valley Springs to deal with people who are sick because we want to get them well. And the first part of it is investigation. And what I want to teach you people to do is learn to investigate your own lives. We need to become like Sherlock Holmes. These are the main areas that we investigate. If someone comes into my office and they say they've got a health problem, well, these are the areas that I want to address. These are areas that you can address with your own life. First of all, unhealthful conditions. Where are they living? And so on. What emotional unhealthful conditions are they living under? What physical unhealthful conditions? Their habits, like their lifestyle. How much water do they drink? What do they eat? How much exercise do they do? And so on. Their recent changes is another thing. If someone comes in and says, look, I've had this, this particular health problem, it might be a swollen gland or something for 2 months, well, I want to know what they did 2 months ago that created that problem. Right? And we'll go into that in a minute. But colon health is another area. We want to know about people's bowel movements. Now, it might sound a little bit personal, but it's a funny thing. One time we had a whole lot of guests arrive on a Sunday, and there was a lady being dropped off by her husband. And I said to him, would you like to stay and have lunch? And he said, that would be great. So we're sitting there eating lunch, and nobody was talking. And I was trying to make conversation, and nobody was saying anything. And the man came over to me and he put his hand up. He said, boy, you've really got a tough lot here this week. He says, I don't think you're going to get boo out of him. Well, anyway, he came back 10 days later to pick up his wife. And he arrived early in the morning. He hadn't had breakfast. I said, well, look, we're about to eat now. Come and join us. And he came to the table and everybody was all talking, and they were all talking about the bowels. Now, one lady said, you should have seen what came out in my toilet this morning. It was just unbelievable. And yeah, and they were all discussing their bowel movements. And he came over and he said, what on earth have you done to them? You've changed their personalities. See, well, do you know that colon health or ill health can change your personality? People who are constipated usually are a bit grouchy. You know what I mean? People that are constipated all the time usually end up having emotional problems because when you congest the body, it affects the blood, it affects the brain, it affects the mind. Spinal health is another area that we need to look at because the central nervous system, which comes from the brain, a tail, right down through the spine, it feeds nerves out to all the different organs of the body. And if there's a compromising of the nerve supply to particular organs, we're going to get sick. For example, if the vertebrae were twisted or bent, or there was a problem there with the vertebrae and it's cutting off the nerve supply to the liver, we're going to get problems in the liver. And it doesn't matter what herbs you give people or how much you cleanse them or what sort of good food you give them, you won't solve their problem until you deal with the spinal problem. It's the number one thing. The most important system in the body is the central nervous system. And when a baby is conceived in the womb, the very first thing that forms is the brain with a big tail. Then it starts to feed out little nerves, and then it builds a casing around the whole lot, around the spine and over the head. And so it's the most important system. Then we look at the teeth, because dental problems today cause a lot of disease. And we see this, and you're going to really be shocked when I tell you some of the cases, like when we get into this further in the program. And I mentioned MS before, but I found that most MS cases have been related to dental conditions. We'll go into that later. Respiratory health. We look at people's breathing. Do they snore? Do they breathe shallow? What's their balance of blood gases, like between oxygen and carbon dioxide? And are they breathing in a proper way that would produce the right balance of blood gases? Improper breathing causes a huge number of diseases, including asthma. Hormonal health we need to look at, because today we're seeing that so many people in our society have got hormonal imbalance because of estrogens or poisons that mimic estrogen that we're subjected to through plastics, through petrochemicals and other chemicals. We're finding it's affecting our hormones, and we're seeing women develop some male attributes in a lot of cases, and we're looking at men developing female attributes because of hormonal imbalances, because of their exposure to chemicals. But on a lesser scale, we're seeing a lot of ladies today with serious premenstrual stress or menopausal problems and so on. And we'll be covering that tomorrow night. Spiritual health is another major area that we look at, and we look at the blood chemistry. Now, the blood chemistry is really important, and sometimes we will look at hair analysis. We'll send hair off to a laboratory, but we've got a huge list of parameters, or a list of areas in the blood that we want checked now. And some doctors won't do it. They look at and they say, "Oh, why would you want to know all this?" They don't even understand why a lot of these, what a lot of these things mean. But we get these blood chemistries done, and from that we can start to plot them into different risk areas, and we can work out often why people have got what they've got. For example, the immune system, we have immunoglobulins, immunoglobulin A, immunoglobulin E and G and M and so on. They all mean different things. So if we see an elevation in immunoglobulin A, we'll know there is a toxin lodged in the mucosal lining of the colon or in the sinus. Then we look at other factors in the blood to work out what that toxin might be and how we're going to deal with it. Immunoglobulin E is usually related to, if it's elevated, it's latex, it's plastics in the system. If it's immunoglobulin M, it's usually mercury. It can be other things, but it's often mercury. So we start to investigate and track through the body and try and work out why somebody's having these health problems, and it's usually related to a toxic invasion or a nutritional deficiency. Now, if we break these up, basically we've got to become like Sherlock Holmes. You need to be Sherlock Holmes with your own life, and we need to be Sherlock Holmes with our patients. We don't just want to give them a herb or a tablet or tell them to change what they're eating. We need to go a lot deeper than that. We need to get the magnifying glass out on someone's life. And hopefully after this week you'll know how to do that a little bit, so you might be able to help your neighbours a little bit. But I mean, if your neighbour comes to you and says, "Look, my child's having an asthma attack," hopefully you'll know how to get the magnifying glass out and work out why. Unhealthful conditions can involve the environment, it can involve work, occupation, or even associations we need to look at. So, for example, a lady that had lung cancer, rather than just treat her, I wanted to know everything about her life. So as I delved into her life, I found out that her husband smokes, and he smokes in the bedroom and in the lounge room and wherever she is, and has smoked all through their marriage. Right, so it's no wonder she got lung cancer. So we had to tell her husband to stop smoking. She had to clean out the house, like clean the curtains and get all that chemical out of the fabric of her house. Eventually, unfortunately, she went home and kicked her husband out. But because he wouldn't stop smoking in the house. But he never got the lung cancer at that point anyway. Work associations and things like that. I've had people that have had sickness because of where they work, they're under suppression all the time. Some boss is always putting them down and riding them and upsetting them, and so they end up getting diarrhoea and bowel problems and stomach problems and digestive problems. And so they come to us rather than just treat the disease. We need to delve in a bit deeper, and we sometimes find that it's actually an emotional problem because of a relationship with their boss. And I've had cases where I've told them, just leave your job, and they've left and the condition's cleared up within days. It's quite surprising. And associations with other people. We had a young fella that came to us to get off drugs. So we put him through a cleanse and we cleaned him up, and he went back to his hometown, back into the drugs. So he came back again 6 months later and we cleansed him out again. And he said, no, I'm strong this time, I'll be fine. Went back into the drugs. So now he came back, and now he works for us. So we've kept him on. Because he realised that it was the associations that was actually causing the problems. His associations. So he had to actually break and cut right off from those associations that were actually pulling him down. And sometimes we're going to have to do that if we want to have a good, healthy life. Wrong habits. Well, that's the 8 laws of health that I was talking about before. And we'll be referring back to these all through the program. Recent changes is really interesting because you have someone come in, and there was a lady from Nambour who came to Living Valley Springs just as an outpatient, and she had a swollen tongue and a rash down her neck and on the top of the chest. And she said, look, I've had this for 2 months and it just won't go away. And I've been to the doctor and he wants to give me prednisone, which is a steroid, and she said, I don't want to take that, so I'm just hoping this will go away, but it won't go away. So I said, well, let's go through your lifestyle. So we went through everything. She was eating pretty good. She was drinking water, exercising. She had a good family life. Everything was pretty good. So then we went a bit deeper. I wanted to know, what did you do 2 months ago? Right, so we went through everything. Nothing changed. The job didn't change. She didn't break up with a boyfriend. Nothing changed. See, so I got down to, well, did you change your deodorant? And she said, well, as a matter of fact, I think I did. So when we started to work it out, that 2 months earlier, she had never really used a deodorant, so she'd gone and bought one in the chemist that was a cream that she used to put in under her arms. And she was using it every day. And this deodorant obviously had some chemical that she was sensitive to, and it was like the next day after she started using the deodorant, she started getting this condition and never actually related it until we finally worked it out. She stopped using the deodorant. I got her to take some green barley to clean the blood for a few days, and the whole thing cleared up in 3 days. Like she'd had it for 2 months. It was just something she was using. There was another really interesting case. Was a lady from Melbourne called me up and said she had a patient who had a disease where for the last 6 months her blood pressure had just dropped for no reason, and she'd collapse. And she ended up in hospital a few times, under observation. They'd send her home and she'd be fine. And she said, we can't work out what's doing this. And she said, but it only happens in the house. So I said, well, it's got to be something in the house. Has she changed houses? No, been there for 30 years. Hasn't painted it, doesn't have a new cat, hasn't got any new carpet. Well, she said, I've looked into all of that. And I said, well, maybe she broke a thermometer. Now, I don't know why I said that, but I deal a bit with the mercury problem, so that might have been why. But I said, maybe she broke a thermometer. And she said, oh, that'd be a long shot. But the next morning I got an email saying, you were right, she broke a thermometer in the lounge room 6 months ago. And she only has these blood pressure drops in the lounge room. Just worked it out. Now, mercury, she was sensitive to mercury. She broke the thermometer near the lounge. It had gone into the carpet. They'd never cleaned it up properly. The vapour was enough to create a problem. And we've had a number of people that have had mercury problems because of thermometers. A girl that I was treating from New Zealand broke a thermometer in her mouth and swallowed it. And within a short time had thyroid disease. By the age of 16 had a thyroid taken out and had a lot of other problems. So mercury is pretty serious, but we will be talking about that one on Tuesday night. Yeah, there's a lot of things you need to look at, recent changes. Colon health, the colon is the sewer system of the body, and it's really the most important one to keep clean, because if you're not eliminating properly and getting good evacuations at least once a day, but preferably twice, and if you're having 3 meals, it's better to have 3 evacuations every day. If you're having 2 meals, 2 evacuations. If you're having 8 meals, well, you should be going all day. But see, the thing is that you need to be evacuating the number of times that you're eating. And death starts in the colon. And as we congest, we see a lot of people with sinus and chronic headaches and congestion up in the head. Once you clean the colon out, that all just goes. Colon cancer's on the increase today, and we find that the main problem with colon cancer, it's because of refined processed foods. Now, when I was talking about the diet before, I didn't mention, well, I said that we don't necessarily recommend, what was I going to say? We recommend people going onto a vegetarian diet gradually, but we don't tell people that meat is the main problem. You know what the main problem really is? The main killer? It's not meat, it's actually the processed refined foods. It's the white sugar, the white flour, the white processed packet foods, cakes, ice creams, biscuits. All that white processed sugared food is actually what's causing most of the problems. See, and you find that today there's a big movement that's saying, oh, well, it's the meat. Well, the meat's got a big part to do with it if the meat's coming from normal conventional farming where the animals have been subjected to a lot of chemicals. But we tell people that if you're going to make a change in your diet, the first thing you want to change before you start changing the meat is actually to get off that refined processed food. And we see a lot of people become vegetarians and stay on the refined processed food. And they're eating packet foods, canned foods, white sugar foods, and so on, and you find that they get major health problems. And we actually get a lot of vegetarians have come to Living Valley Springs with cancer, and they can't understand why. But they say, don't eat meat. Well, it's not the meat that's causing the cancer. It's actually the processed, refined, packet, processed foods. So they're the things that we really need to look at. And they're the things that are causing the major problems in the bowels, the constipation and the cancer. And we need to make sure that the peristaltic muscle in our colon works properly. Right? And that's through having plenty of fibre in the diet and foods that have got, like raw foods like salads and a good variety of greens and carrots and beetroots and all those sort of things are very, very important. And then if you're going to have grains, have the whole grain. And go for things that haven't been hybrid, things like spelt and rye and maybe barley. You find wheat has been very hybrid, and a lot of people have trouble with wheat today. So you're better off going for the other grains. The Chinese, I suppose, chose the best grain when they chose rice. But the Europeans chose the wheat. But the rice is probably the better grain. We do colonic hydrotherapy out there at Living Valley Springs, and it's surprising what we see come out of people. And once we get that out of people, it's just unbelievable how quickly they improve. Enemas, I'll mention here, they're not something you'd want to use every day. But enemas are good in an emergency. If someone's got a bad fever or they're very sick, you can give them an enema. And enemas are a very good thing to have in your home, but they're something you don't want to use every day. We'll talk more about them later on in the program. There's a picture of the bowel, showing many different diseases that we can get in the bowel just from bad living. Now, spinal health, I mentioned the central nervous system. There's a picture of some vertebrae, and you can see how the nerves, it comes down, the main central nervous system comes through the middle of the spine, and the nerves feed out through those little holes. And they go out and they feed the various organs and systems of the body. Now, have I got a little red light on here? Oh, yeah. Can you see that? Okay. Can you see that blue part there? That's actually a disc. And you notice this one up here is much thinner. And this one's not too good either. But you find that those two discs, particularly that one there they're looking at, has been a bit compressed. So up here, the nerve that's coming out through that hole is being compressed. So the nerve supply out here to this might be going to the heart, it might be going to the prostate gland or somewhere. It's actually being compressed. The nerve supply is being restricted. Right, so we see this as being a major issue in health. Now, I'll give you one case study that really brings this home very clearly. There's a man from Bly, came to Living Valley Springs as an outpatient about 2 years ago, and he had prostate cancer. He had a C1 carcinoma stage 4, and I've got the CT scan report which details it, and it said that it was inoperable. In fact, the report said it was an unfortunate diagnosis. It was something like that. It was, in other words, it was saying they couldn't do anything about it. They said that it was a slow progressing cancer, and he would probably live for another 3 years. He was about 60. Right, so he came to me and he said, "Is there anything you can do naturally?" So I looked at his diet and his lifestyle. Sure, there was changes there that we could make, but they weren't. I mean, he wasn't living an unhealthy life. He was a typical Queenslander. He was eating meat, and he was eating plenty of salads, and he was eating plenty of fruit, and he was drinking plenty of water. He wasn't eating junk food, and he was a builder all his life, so he was doing plenty of exercise. So it was really hard to pinpoint in his lifestyle problems that might have created this. So I checked out his spine, and there in his lower back, his L3, his L4 and his L5 were all jammed together. And from L5 to S1, which is a bit further down, that's your pivot, he was okay. So he still had a bit of movement, but he was a bit stiff. You know, he could move this way, but he was a bit stiff in the back. And he'd had this for years. And so I sent him for an X-ray. And the X-ray showed that his L2, L3, L4, L5 areas were all jammed together, and he was getting almost no nerve supply. Now, if you've got a problem like that there, it's not too bad if it's only one, because you've actually got a ganglion of nerves, like down outside the spine. And so if one disc is compressing another, like if one disc is compressed, one vertebrae is compressing another, you'll find that that area will borrow nerves from the ganglion from further up or further down. But when he had like 4 of them all compressed, the nerve supply to his prostate gland was almost non-existent. Right, so we pinpointed the problem. So I sent him to a very good chiropractor, and he had 27 treatments in 9 weeks, right, to shift it, to get it moving, like to get it working again. And he was given exercises to do that would get the circulation going to that part of the body that had been lacking nerve supply for so long. And after the 9 weeks, we got another CT scan done. And I've got the report, and it says they can't find the cancer. It's gone. And the man lives here in Bly. I talk to him quite frequently. He's never had a recurrence of the cancer. He's had no more trouble with his prostate ever since. He sees the chiropractor now once a month for maintenance. And we've changed his diet a little bit, and we've changed his lifestyle a little bit. But the problem was his spine. Now, you can see what I'm saying here is that you might have a problem with some organ in the body, and it may not be what you're eating. It may not be what you're drinking. It might be a mechanical problem in the spine. And we see with prostate troubles, thyroid problems, trouble up here, stomach problems. So often we see that the thoracic vertebrae are compressed. And especially with little children. We've seen so many children that have had hiatus hernias. And I've had a lot of children in the last few years that have been brought in at the age of 5, 6, 7, 8, and they don't enjoy their food. They get pains in the stomach. They always have trouble eating. And so I've put my finger up in there and found a lot of pain. Checked around the spine, there's compression. I've sent them for an X-ray and to a chiropractor, and after a few treatments, no more problems. It's just completely cleared up. One little girl had eczema all over her body, and it was a digestive problem. She wasn't processing her food properly. It was a spinal problem. We got the spine fixed, the skin all cleared up. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? You see, you've got to go deep, and the spine is very, very important, and spinal health is incredibly important. So if you've got problems in the back and you've got health problems, I'd see a good chiropractor. There's a very good one in Noosa that we recommend. His name's Richard Singer. But there are other ones around here. But Richard Singer is particularly good. The method he uses I like, and he gets good results. Okay, now dental health. We're going to be talking about dental health a lot on Tuesday night. But I believe that, and this will probably shock you, but I'll back this up on Tuesday night. And if you're coming Tuesday night, you will leave here totally convinced. But I believe that the present method used in dentistry is probably the greatest attack on, not deliberately, but the greatest attack on the human race, on the health of the human race. And I've come to that conclusion after studying this matter for about 15 years. I've been to America and done 2 courses in blood chemistry that very much involved dentistry. And we've found that the mercury in these fillings that people have got in their mouth leaks into the body at a rate. It mixes with saliva. When it mixes with saliva, it takes an enzyme from the saliva and forms methylmercury or organic mercury, which is 45 times worse than mercury. And it lodges in the central nervous system, in the organs, in the fat, and in different parts of the body. And we're finding that a lot of countries are starting to ban it. Sweden was the first one, they've banned it. It's now coming under review in America and in Canada. There's court cases starting up in various parts of the world at the moment, big class actions, because of dentists putting mercury in people's mouths. The fillings that we have in our teeth are 50% mercury, and mercury is one of the most poisonous substances on the planet. It vaporises at room temperature. It vaporises even more at body temperature. It does not get bound up totally in the alloy. So it leaks all the time, and we only need very small amounts of it to cause trouble. And I work with a number of dentists, a lot of dentists around Australia now, who just specialise in taking it out. And we see people's health improve dramatically. And some of the cases I'll share with you on Tuesday night include a number of MS patients that have completely recovered once we've got the fillings out of their teeth. They're out of their wheelchairs completely. And a study done by the United States Food and Drug Administration looked at 113 MS patients, took all their fillings out, and 86 of them completely recovered. So that's a high percentage. And I'll actually give you some really good case studies on Tuesday night. Root canals is another big problem that, and I'll explain to you on Tuesday night why, but we're seeing a lot of root canals done today, and root canals are simply taking out the nerve and the pulp of the tooth and putting a toxin in there and then sealing it off. The body doesn't like dead bones. If you did that to your finger, the body would reject it. If you crushed your finger and it was hurting all the time, so the doctor cut the top off, drilled out the bone marrow, drilled out the nerve, filled it with formaldehyde, stitched it up the top, I guarantee within a year that finger would fall off. The body would reject it. You'd get an infection around the knuckle and the body would reject it. Because the body does not keep dead bones. So if you've got a root canal in your mouth, then if you're healthy, the body is going to reject it. And it sets up a low-grade infection around the root of the tooth. It affects the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve affects the limbic part of the brain, which affects the nerve supply to the various parts of the body. And so we have various teeth that have been root canaled affect various parts of the body. And we can map that out. We'll go into a lot more detail about that on Tuesday night. But mercury amalgam fillings and root canals are lethal. And we're just seeing so many cancers. And tonight we called it What's Causing All the Cancer. We're seeing so many cancers caused from dentistry. And we've got a lot of dentists who'll back this up. But there was a senior clinical nutritionist came out from America and just ran a course down in Brisbane last weekend for about 110 doctors and dentists. And he just presented all the latest evidence on this. But we've been dealing with this now for 14 years. And we've just got too many case studies to ignore. There's too many total recoveries after the dental changes. Now, I will make this caution at this point, in case you're not here on Tuesday night. If you've got amalgam fillings, don't go and get them taken out by anybody. You find that you can increase contamination. There is a procedure that must be followed. There is a procedure that the dentist needs to follow, so you need to go to a dentist who's trained how to do that. And there needs to be a nutritional preparation using antioxidants and vitamin C, selenium, and fats. And we find that mercury is fat soluble. And because of its fat solubility, people who are skinny and have a low-fat diet and have low serum cholesterol get into trouble. And we've had a lot of cancer patients in their early 30s who've even ended up dying. Some of them have died from cancer, but have developed cancer in their early 30s, and the scenario has been they're skinny, they've got a mouthful of amalgam fillings, they've got a low cholesterol level, and they're on a low-fat diet. And we find that that combination is lethal because you don't have the protection. And the International Academy of Oral Medicine in America says that if you have got more than 6 amalgam fillings in your mouth, that you need to try and maintain a cholesterol level of 5.2 to 6.2. If it gets under 5.2, you're going to get into trouble. And we're finding this all the time with our own patients. So low cholesterol can be far more serious than high cholesterol. A lady I know has got a cholesterol level of 8.6. She's had it for years. She's a little bit overweight, and she's got a mouthful of fillings, and she doesn't seem to have the symptoms of mercury poisoning because she's got a high cholesterol level. Her body has deliberately elevated cholesterol to protect her. And there's a lot of warnings now coming from the American Medical Journal and nutritional doctors in America are saying, be careful taking statins to lower your cholesterol. First of all, find out why it's high. Maybe your liver's deliberately elevating it to protect you from a neuro-fat-soluble toxin. If you take statins to bring your cholesterol down, you may take away your protection. If you do that, you can get cancer. You see? We'll go into this a lot more Tuesday night. Dissimilar metals in the mouth is another big problem. You know, how do they get the gold out of quartz up in Gympie? Or what did they used to use? Mercury. They use mercury to get the gold out of quartz because mercury and gold bond better than any other two metals in the whole range of, what do they call it? The atomical chart, atonomical chart. Because gold binds to mercury really well. Now, when you see someone's mouth and they've got 7 or 8 amalgam fillings and 2 gold crowns, you know they've got problems. Because every time they've got a little bit of acid in their mouth, you're going to get electrolysis taking place, and the gold will draw the mercury out of the amalgam filling and you'll swallow it, and it goes into the system. So we see the people with a combination of gold and mercury are in a lot more trouble. Now, the other thing is that the combination of gold and mercury, my mind just went blank. It's getting late. Yeah, the trouble with the mercury is if you... Oh, that's what I was going to say. I can't understand why dentists would even put gold and mercury into the same mouth, because in chemistry you would have learnt when you were at school that if you want to make an electric current, all you need is 2 metals, 2 dissimilar metals in acid. Is that right? Remember that? 2 dissimilar metals in an acid, that's how you make a battery. So if you put gold and mercury amalgam in a mouth, every time you eat a lemon, you're going to get electrolysis. So anyway, we'll go into that more. Low-grade infections, cavitations, and bite dysfunctions are other areas that I will talk about on Tuesday night. So come along. If you're true to your teeth, they won't be false to you. Now, respiratory health is really important too, and I mentioned about breathing. Do you know the nose is a really important organ? It humidifies, it disinfects, it filters, cools, warms, controls the flow and regulates the blood gases. So if we are mouth breathing, we're not getting all of that. Do you know all our breathing should be done through the nose? That's in and out, nothing through the mouth. The mouth's for eating and talking, but not for breathing. And we find with asthmatics, they're usually nearly always mouth breathers. And so there's a number of ways we can deal with this. But we should be breathing 8 to 12 breaths per minute. We find asthmatics usually breathe about 19 or 20 breaths a minute because they're taking shallow breaths instead of long, deep breaths. We need long, deep breaths all the time. Train the lungs to do them. Don't have these short, shallow breaths. The role of carbon dioxide in the blood is that it triggers the breathe-in mechanism. So when we breathe out, our oxygen comes out, our carbon dioxide in the blood increases, and when it gets to a certain level, it triggers the brain to tell us to breathe in again. Right? So if our carbon dioxide is too low, we won't get that trigger. Carbon dioxide also relaxes all our smooth muscle tissue in the body, including our arteries. And it facilitates the transfer of oxygen from the blood to the cells in the body. So CO2 is really important. Now, we often think of CO2 as being a waste product, but it actually plays a major role in the body before it comes out. Mouth breathing causes hyperventilation, because if you're mouth breathing, you're actually blowing your carbon dioxide out too quickly. And so your CO2 level comes down, 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 and your oxygen goes up, up, up. You hyperventilate, and with asthmatics, their lungs say to the blood, we've got, sorry, it's the other way around. The blood says to the oxygen, lungs, I'm getting tired. The blood says to the lungs, we've got too much oxygen here now. Can you constrict off for a little while until we can build up the carbon dioxide level? So an asthma attack is a constriction of the airways because of hyperventilation in the blood. Low carbon dioxide, often caused by mouth breathing. Simple as that. So with asthmatics, we teach them how to breathe properly, and we teach them how to tape their mouth when they go to sleep so that they train their nose to do all their breathing. Mouth breathing can also affect our circulation and our digestion. The solution is you can do a sensor check. And a sensor check is simply by breathing out all your air and holding your nose and timing how long does it take before you get the very first sensation to breathe in. That's when the carbon dioxide is triggering your brain saying breathe in. You don't hold your breath as long as you can. You hold it until you get the first sensation to breathe in. That should be about 40 seconds. But with asthmatics, we find it's about 10. Right? You can check your own. But by doing reduced breathing exercises and training your lungs to hold on a bit longer and let the CO2 build up a little bit longer, you can actually increase that sensor check. And the other solution is to tape the mouth. Get some Leukophore paper tape and tape the mouth when you go to bed. Now that's a tremendous thing. We find people who snore. We had a man, it was a very interesting case. He came to Living Valley Springs, and on the last night before he went home, he got up and told this story. He said, I've had sleep apnea for years. He said, and it's created a lot of health problems. He said, I've spent now a total of $40,000 dealing with it. He said, I've been to America, I've been to courses, I've bought a big machine, that didn't work, I bought a bigger machine. He said, now I wear a big mask, I tape right around my head, a big strap when I go to sleep, and I have to have a machine next to my bed. And he said, and I still have problems. And he said, anyway, when he came to Living Valley Springs, on the first day, he was given a roll of tape and told to tape his mouth in the night, and instead of using all the other apparatus. He said, I've been doing it for the last 9 nights. And he said, it's worked. He said, I've spent $40,000 on medicine, and he said, all I needed was a $2 roll of tape. Yeah, so Leukophore paper tape, if you have trouble with mouth breathing when you're asleep, you just try it. If you wake up feeling really tired because of mouth breathing, you've got a dry mouth, a dry throat, tape your mouth for a few nights and see how you feel. It just forces your nose to do the breathing. Now, if you've got a blocked nose and you tape your mouth, your brain knows what's going on and it will clear your nose. Your brain will produce antihistamines and clear your nose. I'll tell you one case study. I think I've got one here. There was a young man, about 30, came to us having seizures. Now, this guy had been having seizures for years, and he was taking a drug, but he was still having seizures, and he always had them about 1 o'clock in the morning. Now, I noticed that his nose was all bent. In fact, my wife said to me, you want to check about his nose because he's probably been a fighter. So I asked him if he'd been a fighter, and he said, no. He said, when I was about 6, I had a really bad nose, and I had an operation done, and he said, I've never been able to really use my nose. I do all my breathing through my mouth. So It turned out he could breathe through the nose, but he just didn't. What was actually happening was he'd go to bed, he'd heavy mouth breathe. His chin would drop open, he'd heavy mouth breathe, his CO2 level would come down, 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 until it got so low that by 1 o'clock in the morning, he didn't have enough CO2 to trigger his brain to tell him to breathe in again. And he just stopped breathing. And he'd have a seizure. And all we did to fix it was get him to tape his mouth. Now, he wouldn't tape his mouth in the night, he wasn't game to, so we had to get him to tape it in the day while he was reading a book or something, and until he actually trained himself to use the nose. Once he'd got enough confidence in his nose, he was then able to start taping his mouth in the night, no more seizures. Simple thing like that. Sleep apnea, asthma, cardiac arrhythmia can all be caused from mouth breathing. Now, I'm not going to go into hormonal health now because we're covering that tomorrow night. So I'll just move right through these slides. Now, emotional health, we will be covering that one on Wednesday night, but the bottom line is that a merry heart does good like a medicine, and a broken spirit drives up the bones. And so we really need to make sure we're enjoying life. We need to be happy. And if we're letting things get us down, if we're letting life get on top of us, well, then we need to look at what we're doing. You know, where are we in life? Because life can be great. Life can just be so wonderful. Relationships and the things to do and places to go and people to meet and all that. We can make life fantastic. But if we're finding life is actually getting on top of us, we need to stop, about face, have a good look at it. We'll talk a lot about that on Wednesday night. And spiritual health, well, what we recommend to people who come to Living Valley Springs is to seek truth with an open heart. Like, in other words, don't get bogged down into any belief system. Like, we should be able to test everything we believe every day with an open heart. If it's true, well, then we'll keep it. If it's not true, well, then we'll move on. And we find that if we get bogged down in a system, we say, well, that's as far as I'm going, you'll find that then that will end up affecting your health. You have to be willing to always test what you believe and always be willing to move on and take in new things. And the other thing that we recommend is to talk to the Creator. Talk to the Creator and get to know the one who made you. He knows your body, He knows your mind, He knows everything. And if you make a habit of daily talking to your Creator, you'll find that that will improve your health. There's studies been done on this, where the electricity in the brain increases when you're talking to your Creator. There's been studies done. And the other thing we recommend in the spiritual health is if everybody tries to make a difference in other people's lives, the world will be a much better place. And whatever you're doing, try and do something on a regular basis that makes a difference in the lives of other people. Well, that's the end for tonight. Thank you for coming, and it's been a long night. Tomorrow night, try and bring someone with you. Bring your neighbour, bring some friends, get on the telephone tomorrow. Tomorrow night's a really important subject. We're talking about hormones. And I will be taking the first talk tomorrow night. Graham Taylor will be taking the second talk. Both of them will be very informative. And I think if you know people that have got hormonal imbalance, bring them along tomorrow night.